In the thick, honey-colored Harmattan haze that settles over Benin City like a memory, the air carries dust and the scent of burning charcoal from roadside pepper soup joints. It was in this city, in a weathered bungalow on a street named after a forgotten warrior, that my father, Sam Osaigbovo, built his life on a principle as solid and unyielding as the ancient mud walls of the Oba's palace. He was a man whose name was spoken with reverence in the extended family dialect, a synonym for reliability, for the open hand, for the shoulder that never shrugged. Sam is there, they would say, a simple statement that carried the weight of an unspoken contract, and Sam was always there. The geography of my father's life was a map of Nigerian oil belt towns, each place adding a layer to the man he became and the burden he chose to carry. It began in Irua, the sleepy ancestral town from which our lineage sprang. It was in Irua that the family compound stood, a collection of houses around a sandy courtyard where the old stories were told. It was there that the foundational stones of family expectation were laid. My grandfather, a retired headmaster with a stern face but a soft heart, had been a man of similar ilk. He had sent his younger brothers to school, had settled disputes, had been the custodian of the family's dignity. When he passed, the mantle by unspoken decree fell to my father, the first son. I remember the drives back to Irua as a child, the air growing cooler as we left the bustling humidity of Benin. The paved road would give way to a laterite scar that shook the car and painted its flanks a fine rust-colored red. My father would grip the steering wheel with a kind of purposeful determination. For him, returning home wasn't just a visit. It was a duty. He would go to pay homage at my grandfather's grave, to greet the eldest women who still sat on low stools in the shade, their faces maps of time, and, inevitably, to listen. Problems, it seemed, had a special scent that drew them to my father. Before we had even finished the proffered kola nut, they would emerge from the compound shadows. And Uncle would shuffle forward, his eyes on the ground, to explain about his wife's hospital bill. A cousin, his voice thick with shame, would speak of school fees for his 2 children, the deadline looming like an executioner's date. My father would listen, his broad, serene face betraying no fatigue, no resentment. He would reach into his pocket or make a note in the small black diary he always carried. "I will see to it," he would say, his voice a low, steady rumble. "Don't worry yourselves." From Irua, the tendrils of need stretched south to the frantic, oil-soaked city of Wari. Wari was a different beast entirely, a cacophony of pidgin English, the greasy shimmer of crude on the creeks, and a frantic energy that was the opposite of Irua's stillness. My father had worked there for a time as a senior auditor for the Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation. It was in Wari that his reputation for competence and generosity truly flourished. He had a good job, a car, a house, and a decent quarter of Benin. In the eyes of his kin, he was the fountain that would never run dry. It was in Wari that the true extent of his burden began to reveal itself to me. A younger brother, Osaro, had followed him there, seeking the same fortune. But Osaro was a different kind of man, charming, restless, with a gambler's gleam in his eye. He drifted from one quick money scheme to another. When his deals soured, as they always did, he would appear at our door in Benin, his clothes rumpled, his smile apologetic. He needed money for a new connection in Port Harcourt. He needed his rent paid. He needed his son's school fees sorted. My mother, Eki, a woman whose quiet strength was forged in the very fire of these trials, would watch these visits with a tightening around her eyes. She had her own map of the cities we inhabited. Surulere, Lagos, was her dream. It was where her sister lived, where the streets hummed with a sophisticated melody, where the shops on Adeniran Ogunsanya Street held the promise of beautiful things. She spoke of it with a longing that was palpable, a yearning for a life where her husband's attention wasn't perpetually divided amongst a cast of thousands. "Sam," she would say after Osaro had left with a heavy envelope and a lighter heart, "when is it our turn? When is it my children's turn? Osaro's boys' fees are paid, but look at your own son's uniform. It is mended in 3 places." My father would sigh, a deep, weary sound that seemed to come from the very core of him. He would look at her, his eyes holding a universe of unspoken things. "Eki, don't talk like that. They are family. If I don't help, who will? You want them to point at us? To say Sam's wife let him abandon his own blood? I will not have my family become a laughingstock." That phrase was his mantra, his shield, his shackle, a laughingstock. It was the ultimate disgrace in our culture, to be talked about, to be pitied, to be seen as the branch of the family that forgot its roots. This was a fate worse than any financial strain. He was not just providing money, he was purchasing a currency far more valuable in his eyes, the family's good name and his own place as its guardian. He was building a fortress of respectability with bricks of banknotes, mortar made of his own deferred dreams. And so the calls continued. A nephew needed a job and a place to stay in Benin while he looked for one. He would sleep on our parlor floor for 6 months, eating our food, using our electricity, while my sisters and I squeezed closer together in our room. A cousin in Wari needed a loan to start a taxi business. The business would fail, the car would be repossessed, and my father would silently absorb the loss. An aunt in Irua needed her roof repaired after a violent rainstorm. My father would send the money for a new aluminium roof, while the ceiling in our own kitchen sagged precariously, leaking brown water whenever it rained. He was the family's son, and we, his immediate family, were the planets forced to orbit at a cold, distant periphery, warmed only by the faint light that reached us after everyone else had basked in the heat. We did not go on holidays. We did not have new cars. My mother's dream of Surulere, of a modern flat with a view of the bustling Lagos life, receded further with every passing year, a shimmering mirage on a horizon made of other people's invoices. I saw the toll it took on him in the quiet moments. The way he would sit on the veranda in the evenings, after the last supplicant had left, staring out at the darkening street, a bottle of Golder beer growing warm in his hand. He would talk to me sometimes, his voice low and reflective. "You see all these things, my son? Family is not easy. It is a rope that ties you. You can't just cut it because it chafes. You have to carry the load. Your grandfather carried it. Now it is my turn. I pray when my time comes you will be ready." He spoke of a future I couldn't then comprehend. He was already preparing me for a weight I had not asked to carry, planting the seeds of duty in my young heart. He would take me with him sometimes to the bank to make the transfers, to withdraw the thick wads of naira that would then be dispatched to various corners of our family network. He was teaching me the geography of obligation, the coordinates of every struggling relative on the map of our lives. There was a brief, tantalizing moment when Surulere seemed within reach. My father got a promotion and a significant bonus. My mother's eyes lit up with a fire I hadn't seen in years. She started making calls to agents in Lagos, describing the flat she wanted with a balcony and a functional kitchen. She bought magazines with pictures of beautiful Lagos homes. For a few weeks, our house in Benin was filled with a different kind of energy, a hopeful, electric buzz. But the family's network of needs was as sensitive as a spider's web. A tremor in Wari sent a signal all the way to Benin. Osaro had been arrested. A business deal that was, in truth, a fraud had gone wrong. He was in police custody, and the price for his release was steep. The call came on a Sunday afternoon, just as we were sitting down to eat my mother's delicious owo soup. My father's face, as he listened, drained of all color. He hung up and without a word went into his room and emerged with his checkbook. My mother watched him, her own face a mask of dread. "Sam," she whispered, her voice cracking. "The Lagos flat." He didn't look at her. He couldn't. "Osaro is my brother, Eki, my own father's son. He is in a cell. What would they say? That Sam left his brother to rot?" The money for Surulere went to Wari, to grease the palms of policemen and lawyers, to secure Osaro's freedom. Osaro emerged from the cell with his charm intact and his debts unresolved. My mother retreated into a silence that was worse than any argument. The fire in her eyes died. She never mentioned Surulere again. A part of her had given up, accepting that she was married not just to a man, but to an entire, sprawling, insatiable corporation called the family. My father, Sam Osagbovo, continued his work. He continued to be the one everyone cried to. He was the patriarch, the problem solver, the reliable one. He carried the family's dignity on his shoulders, a mantle woven from bank statements and promissory notes. He went to Irua for the festivals, distributing gifts and cash with the benevolent air of a chief. He settled disputes in Wari over the phone, his calm voice a balm for frayed tempers. He was a rock, a monument, a good man by every definition his world offered, and he was so busy being everyone's father, everyone's brother, everyone's savior, that he forgot he was also just a man. He forgot that the human heart, no matter how vast, has a finite capacity. He spent his life ensuring his family would never be a laughingstock, never realizing that the joke, with its bitter cosmic irony, was on him. The punchline was coming, delivered not by the struggles of the living, but by the final, absolute silence of the dead. The day he died, the world he had so painstakingly propped up did not just wobble, it collapsed, revealing the hollow foundation upon which it had all been built, and the profound, echoing emptiness where all his beneficiaries used to be. The Harmattan had arrived early that year, painting Benin City in shades of gray and dust. It was December, and the air carried that peculiar blend of dry cold and anticipation that always preceded Christmas. For weeks, our home on Ogiso Street had hummed with a different kind of energy, one that revolved entirely around my mother's quiet, persistent campaign for Surulere. She had found the flat through her sister, Auntie Adesua, who lived in Lagos and understood the geography of dreams. It was on Bode Thomas Street in the heart of Surulere, a two-bedroom flat on the third floor of a decent block, with a balcony that faced the street and a kitchen that my mother described in the reverent tones usually reserved for holy places. "Sam, imagine," she would say in the evenings, spreading the agent's photographs across the dining table like precious artifacts. I can cook and still see the children playing outside. No more kerosene stoves smelling up the whole house. Gas, Sam, real gas connection. My father would look at the photographs, his face a careful mask of neutrality, but I could see the conflict in his eyes. The flat cost 80,000 naira for a year's rent in advance, plus agency fees, plus moving costs. It was a fortune, but he had the bonus from work, nearly 120,000 naira sitting in a new savings account. It was more money than I had ever imagined existing in one place. "We will see, Eki," he would say, but there was a softness in his voice, a willingness to be convinced. "We will see after Christmas." My mother, sensing victory, doubled her efforts. She began packing our belongings into old Ghana must-go bags, sorting through years of accumulated life with the determination of a woman who had waited too long. She spoke of schools in Lagos for my sisters and me, of the cinema in Surulere, of the Christmas lights on Tinubu Square. For the first time in my life, I saw in her face something I had only glimpsed in photographs from her wedding day. Hope, bright and unguarded. It was on a Wednesday, 3 weeks before Christmas, that the call came from Wari. I remember the evening vividly because my father had promised to take us to see the Christmas decorations at the Bendel Insurance Sports Club. My mother had made coconut rice, and we were all in high spirits, the kind of ordinary happiness that seems, in retrospect, almost unbearably precious. The phone rang, that heavy black rotary dial that sat on a small table in the hallway, and my father answered it with his usual calm greeting. "Osig Bovo here." I was watching him from the dining table, not really paying attention until I saw his face change. It was subtle, the way a clear sky darkens before a storm. His jaw tightened, his shoulders, usually so relaxed, drew up slightly. He listened for a long time, saying nothing, his eyes fixed on a point on the wall that wasn't there. "Okay," he said finally, his voice a low rumble. "Okay, I will come. Tell him I'm coming." He hung up and stood there for a moment, his hand still resting on the phone. The silence in the room was suddenly enormous. My mother had stopped eating, her spoon suspended halfway to her mouth. We all waited. "That was Osaro's wife," my father said, not turning around. "Osaro has been arrested in Wari. He's in police custody at A Division." The name fell into the room like a stone into still water. Uncle Osaro. My father's younger brother. The one with the gambler's eyes and the restless spirit. The one who had borrowed money for a dozen businesses, a printing press in Sapel, a provision store in Eferun, a taxi in Wari itself, and watched each one crumble like sandcastles before the tide. My mother set down her spoon. Her face, so alive with hope just moments ago, was carefully, deliberately blank. "What did he do this time, Sam?" My father turned, and I saw the weight already settling on him. "It's a business deal gone wrong. Some people he was working with, they've accused him of fraud, of taking money for goods he never delivered. His wife says if we don't get him out before the weekend, they'll transfer him to the prison in Kirikiri. Lagos." The word hung in the air. Lagos. The city of my mother's dreams, now attached to my uncle's disgrace. "How much?" my mother asked. Her voice was quiet, controlled, the voice of a woman who already knew the answer, but needed to hear it spoken. My father hesitated. He looked at me, then at my sisters, before answering. 40,000 for the lawyers, another 20 for the police, for the complainant. 60,000 total, minimum. And the silence that followed was the loudest thing I had ever heard. 60,000 naira, almost exactly the amount my father had set aside for the Surulere rent, the bonus that was supposed to rewrite our family story. My mother stood up slowly, her chair scraping against the concrete floor. She walked to the window and stood with her back to us, looking out at the darkening street. When she spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. The flat in Surulere is 80,000. We have 120. If you take 60, we have 60 left. 60,000 cannot rent a room in Mushin, let alone a flat in Surulere. I know, Eki. My father's voice was heavy, burdened. I know. Osaro has done this before, Sam. How many times? How many businesses? How many promises? And now, at Christmas, when we finally... She stopped, her voice breaking. She pressed her forehead against the window glass, her shoulders shaking slightly. My father went to her, placing his hands on her shoulders. She flinched but didn't move away. Eki, he is my brother, my father's son. If I don't go, if I don't help, and something happens to him in that cell, beatings, sickness, God forbid, how will I live with myself? How will I face our father's grave? What will the family say? The family, my mother repeated, bitterness seeping into her voice like water through a cracked pot. The family that takes and never gives. The family that will not lift a finger for you. For your children, for me, that family. It is still my family, Eki. It is still my name. My mother turned to face him then, and I saw that her eyes were dry. The tears had been replaced by something harder, something that looked like acceptance but felt like surrender. Go, Sam. Go to Wari. Save your brother. I will be here, as always, waiting, as always, last. She walked past him, past us, and into their bedroom, closing the door quietly behind her. The sound of that closing door was more devastating than any slam. My father stood alone in the middle of the room, a large man made small by the weight of his choices. He looked at us, his children, and tried to smile. It was a terrible, heartbreaking failure of a smile. Finish your food, he said. We will still see the lights another time. But we didn't finish our food. None of us could eat. The next morning, my father left for Wari. He wore his best white agbada, the one he reserved for important occasions, as if dressing well might lend dignity to the errand. My mother did not come to the door to see him off. She stayed in the bedroom, and I heard no sound from behind that closed door, not even the rustle of sheets. I went with my father to the bus park. The drive was silent, the air thick with things unsaid. At the park, he bought his ticket from a sweating conductor, then turned to me. Look after your mother, he said, gripping my shoulder. And your sisters. I will be back in 2 days. Dad, I said, the word escaping before I could stop it. Why does it always have to be you? Why can't Uncle Osaro's wife ask her own family? Why can't the other uncles help? My father looked at me for a long moment, his dark eyes searching my face. Then he sighed, that deep, weary sound I would come to know so well. Because, my son, when you are the one who can, you must. That is what it means to be a man. That is what it means to be Osegbovo. When your grandfather died, your uncles were young. I was the one who sent them to school. I was the one who found Osaro his first job. I started this. I cannot stop now. But you didn't start it, I protested. Grandfather started it, and his father before him. It's not fair. He smiled then, a real smile, though it was tinged with sadness. Fair? Who told you life is fair? Life is what you do for others. When I am gone, you will understand. Now go home. Take care of your mother. I watched him board the bus, his white agbada bright against the dusty interior. As the bus pulled away, he waved, and I waved back. And I didn't know that this journey would become the defining moment of our family's story, the line between before and after. Wari in December was a furnace of humidity and desperation. My father arrived at the motor park in the early afternoon and was met by Osaro's wife, Auntie Blessing, a thin woman whose eyes were permanently wide with anxiety. She took him straight to the police station, A Division, a squat colonial-era building that squatted behind high fences like a toad waiting to swallow the unwary. The station was chaos. Men in handcuffs sat on long wooden benches, women wailed in corners, policemen in faded uniforms shouted at everyone and no one. The smell of sweat, fear, and stale cigarette smoke hung in the air like a physical presence. My father, with his calm dignity and his white agbada, moved through it like a man walking through a dream. Osaro was in a cell at the back. When they brought him out, my father barely recognized him. In 3 days, his brother had aged 10 years. His clothes were filthy, his eyes red-rimmed, his hands trembling. There was a fresh bruise on his cheekbone, purple and yellow at the edges. Sam, Osaro whispered, and tears spilled down his cheeks. Sam, thank God you came. My father looked at him, this brother he had raised, had fed, had educated, had saved a dozen times before. He felt no anger, only a profound, bone-deep weariness. What happened, Osaro? The truth. The truth, as it emerged in fragments over the next hour, was both simple and sordid. Osaro had partnered with some Liberian refugees who claimed to have connections for cheap electronics from Cotonou. He had collected money from several Wari businessmen, promising to deliver generators and televisions at a fraction of the market price. The Liberians had disappeared with the money 2 weeks ago. The businessmen, realizing they had been swindled, had come for Osaro. He had no money to repay them. They had gone to the police. It wasn't my fault, Sam, Osaro pleaded, his eyes darting between his brother and the policeman watching them. I was tricked. I didn't know they were thieves. I am innocent. My father said nothing. He had heard these words before, too many times. He simply nodded to the lawyer he had brought from Benin, a sharp young man who had handled family matters before. The negotiations took 2 days. 2 days of sitting in the sweltering heat of the station, of being shuttled between the investigating officer, the complainant's lawyer, and the magistrate who would have to sign the release papers. 2 days of phone calls to Benin, to Irua, to anyone who might help, while my mother sat at home in a silence that was louder than any accusation. On the second day, my father met with the chief complainant, a burly man named Chief Igodolo, who dealt in building materials. They sat in a small office near the Wari main market, the air thick with the smell of frying plantains from a nearby buka. Your brother took my money, Chief Igodolo said, his voice flat. 80,000 naira. For generators he promised to deliver in 2 weeks. That was 3 months ago. My father nodded. He had heard this story before, with different names and different amounts. He is a fool, my father said quietly. But he is my brother. What will it take to make this go away? Chief Igodolo studied him for a long moment. He saw a man of substance, a man who spoke with the quiet authority of someone used to being listened to. The police want their share, the lawyers want theirs. I want my money back, but I am not an unreasonable man. 40,000, and I withdraw the complaint. The rest is between you and the police. 40,000. Exactly what the lawyer had quoted for his own fees. 60,000 total, just as my father had calculated. He did not bargain, he did not plead. He simply reached into the leather bag he carried and counted out the money in neat stacks of 100 naira notes. Money that had been meant for a flat in Surulere, for a kitchen with a gas connection, for his wife's long-deferred dream. Chief Igodolo counted the money carefully, his thick fingers moving with surprising dexterity. When he finished, he nodded and placed the notes in his own bag. Your brother is lucky to have you, he said. Most men would have let him rot. My father said nothing. He was thinking of his wife, of his children, of the photographs of the flat on Bode Thomas Street. He was thinking of the word lucky and how strangely it applied to this situation. The release came through on the evening of the second day. Osaro walked out of the station, a free man, blinking in the fading light like a man emerging from a long illness. He tried to embrace my father, but my father stepped back. Don't, my father said. Not now. Just get in the car. They drove to Osaro's apartment in Ekpon, a cramped 2-room place that smelled of mildew and stale food. Auntie Blessing was waiting, and she fell to her knees when she saw her husband, weeping with relief. Their 3 children, thin and wide-eyed, watched from the corner. My father stood in the doorway, an outsider in his brother's home. He watched the reunion, the tears, the whispered prayers of thanks. He felt nothing. He was empty, hollowed out by 2 days of negotiations and the certain knowledge of what he had sacrificed. Osaro, his gratitude, genuine if temporary, came to him. Sam, I don't know how to thank you. You saved my life. I swear, this is the last time. I will change. I will find real work. I will pay you back every kobo. My father looked at him, this brother he had loved and raised and saved so many times. He wanted to believe him. He always wanted to believe. But the words came out anyway, quiet and tired. You said that last time, Osaro, and the time before, and the time before that. I have lost count. Osaro's face fell. This time is different, Sam. I mean it. You always mean it, my father said. That is the tragedy. You always mean it, and it never matters. But I cannot stop. You are my brother. You are my father's son. So I will keep paying, and you will keep failing, and this will continue until one of us dies. That is our story, Osaro. That is all it will ever be. He turned and walked out, leaving his brother standing in the doorway, leaving the tears and the promises and the familiar, toxic gratitude behind. He found a hotel near the Wari Motor Park, a cheap place with a ceiling fan that rattled and sheets that smelled of bleach. He lay on the bed in his underwear, staring at the rotating blades, and did not sleep. He returned to Benin the next afternoon. I was waiting at the motor park, having begged my mother to let me go. When I saw him step off the bus, I was struck by how old he looked. Not in years, he was only 45, but in his bearing. He moved like a man carrying something too heavy for any human to bear. We drove home in silence. When we arrived, my mother was in the kitchen cooking. The smell of egusi soup filled the house, rich and familiar. She did not come out to greet him. She did not need to. The soup was her greeting, her acceptance, her surrender. My father went to the bedroom and emerged a few minutes later in his house clothes. He sat at the dining table and my mother brought him food. She placed it before him without a word, then sat across from him watching. "The money is gone," my father said quietly. "All of it. The flat in Surulere." "I know, Sam." My mother's voice was calm, devoid of anger. "I knew when you left. I have already told Auntie Adesua to tell the agent we are not coming." My father looked at her, and for the first time in my life, I saw tears in his eyes. Not falling, but there, gathered at the edges, threatening. "Eki, I am sorry. I am so sorry." "I know, Sam." She reached across the table and took his hand. "You are a good man, too good. That is your curse. But you are my husband, and I knew who I was marrying. We will stay here. We will manage. We always manage." It was not forgiveness exactly. It was something more complicated. Acceptance, resignation, love so intertwined with frustration that they could no longer be separated. My father lowered his head over his food, and my mother sat with him, and the silence between them was full of all the things that could never be said. That night, I heard my father crying. It was a soft, muffled sound coming from their bedroom, hidden behind the whir of the standing fan and the distant noise of the city. I had never heard my father cry before. I lay in my bed listening and understood for the first time that adults carry griefs that have no names, wounds that never fully heal. The next morning, life continued. My father went to work. My mother cooked and cleaned. My sisters and I went to school. The flat in Surulere receded into the realm of dreams, a story we would tell about what almost happened, and Osaro, free and grateful and already forgetting his promises, returned to Wari to begin the slow, inevitable process of finding the next scheme, the next failure, the next crisis that would require his brother's rescue. But something had changed. A crack had appeared in the foundation of our family, invisible but real. My father continued to be the one everyone cried to. The calls kept coming, the needs kept multiplying, and he kept answering. But there was a new weight in his eyes, a weariness that never fully left. He had paid the ultimate price for his brother's freedom, not in money, but in hope. And hope, once surrendered, is the hardest thing in the world to reclaim. The Harmattan continued to blow, covering Benin in its gray veil. Christmas came and went. We did not see the lights at the sports club. We did not move to Surulere. We remained in our bungalow on Ogiso Street, a family anchored by a father who was slowly drowning in the weight of his own goodness, surrounded by a sea of family that would never, ever stop needing. The day the crying stopped. The call came at dawn when the Harmattan had retreated and the first rains of March were lashing against our windows in Benin. My mother's scream pierced the morning like nothing I had ever heard, a raw animal sound that brought the neighbors running. My father, Sam Oseibovo, had died in his sleep, a massive heart attack, the doctor would later say, brought on by years of stress, by the weight of carrying a family that never learned to walk on its own. He was 49 years old. The days that followed were a blur of wailing women, murmured condolences, and the endless, suffocating presence of relatives who materialized from every corner of the country. They came from Wari, from Lagos, from villages I had never heard of. They filled our house on Ogiso Street, eating our food, drinking our water, occupying every available space with their grief. And my mother, stunned and silent, moved among them like a ghost, performing the rituals of widowhood with mechanical precision, while her heart lay shattered somewhere beneath her black wrapper. But it was Irua that would break her. It was Irua that would show us the true face of the family my father had died for. The journey to Irua for the burial took 3 hours on roads made treacherous by the early rains. We traveled in a convoy of hired cars, my mother, my 2 sisters, and me, along with Auntie Adesua, who had come from Lagos the moment she heard. My father's body lay in a casket in the hearse ahead of us, making its final journey to the ancestral hometown where his own father lay buried. As we approached the family compound, I felt a tightening in my chest. This was the place I'd visited so often as a child, the place where my father had taught me to greet elders properly, to kneel before the old women, to understand that family was everything. Now we were returning with his body, and everything felt wrong. The compound was already full when we arrived. Tents had been erected in the sandy courtyard, their blue and white stripes flapping in the hot breeze. Plastic chairs were arranged in neat rows. Cooking pots bubbled over open fires, sending columns of smoke into the gray sky. And everywhere were faces I recognized. Uncles, aunts, cousins, second cousins, people whose names I knew, but whose hearts I had never understood. The hearse pulled up and the wailing began. It was a performance, I realized even then, a required display. The women threw themselves against the vehicle, beating their chests, crying out to the sky. Sam! Sam!